Hello, 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 and welcome to Kindred Skulls 2023. It's the official season preview, season kickoff episode, whatever you want to call it. That's what this is. The Minnesota Vikings are about to take the field for the first time in the regular season, and the whole show is about to kick off. We're recording this on a Wednesday, so Matt and I have yet to watch any 2023 season football, regular season football. So we're both very excited, brimming with excitement. I kind of buried the lead there a little bit. I'd like to uh, introduce my one of my co-hosts, Matt Freese. How are you this afternoon,
I got
Matt?
you on your back foot so far, Greg. I mean, and you keep having to correct yourself like the preseason didn't happen. That's not real football anyway.
Uh,
Um, but I'm really stoked to get back to see Vikings football and hopefully have Vikings win in week one. I think it's set up pretty nicely, but we'll get into that later in the show.
Yes, that will finish the show with a Vikings Bucks preview. But yeah, I agree. It's pretty set up pretty well. Matt, we kind of blew it. We missed the cut day episode. It didn't happen. The final preseason game was pretty uninspiring. It was not that great to watch. It was we just kind of didn't have a ton of motivation and schedules being look. Let's just get this out of the way. Let's talk about what happened at the end of the preseason. Talk about cut day a little bit. Any surprises? Anything that really stuck out to you? I felt like it was pretty chalk. There wasn't a lot to me that was like, oh, really? Aside from a trade that I know you want to discuss, that was a little surprising. Just give us your general reaction to the end of the preseason and the 53-man roster.
Yeah, so end of the preseason, I didn't watch the Arizona game yet. I was on a business trip all
I
last
knew it.
week.
I knew you didn't
And
watch.
it was like I by the time I got I wasn't able to watch it live. By the time I got the tape and everything, I had to go on my business trip. It was like I was getting back to the hotel. I was on the West Coast, so I was getting back to the hotel at 8 o'clock. I'd message you guys and I'm like, hey, do you guys want to record an episode? And it's 11 o'clock over on the East Coast where we are, and it's like, no, I have to go to work in the morning. What are you talking about? So it just didn't get through at that
Didn't
point.
happen.
But some pretty significant notes for roster cutdown day, right? Initially, the Vikings only kept 8 offensive linemen. They brought in Scott Quessenberry from the Bills. He's kind of a rotational backup. He's got a great story, right? I don't know if you remember, Greg, but he's the guy who had cancer, like non-Hodgkin's lymphoma back with the Texans, missed an entire year to do that, maybe a year plus, and came back as played. I mean, he's been a depth piece for a long time. He's in his 30s, right? So he's not somebody who's going to shake up the offensive line structure for the Minnesota Vikings. A couple of other moves, right? They kept Kenny Nwangwu on their initial 53-man roster. Then they put him on IR. Chris Reed has been on NFI the whole time, so they never really needed to do a transaction, but they kept him on NFI, which means he misses at least the first 4 games. Once they put Nwangwu on IR, they did a replacement. They brought in Myles Gaskin. It should be noted that they cut their 7th-round draft pick, Dwayne McBride, in the running back room. So they only have 3 running backs, right? Plus CJ Ham as the fullback is kind of the 4th player in that group. With Gaskin, I think Gaskin can he's not going to be an inspiring player. And I don't think he was an inspiring player even all the way back to his days at Washington, right? Like, I think he ran like a 4.6 or something like that. He's not particularly explosive, but he's got
He,
NFL
he
rotational experience, and I don't hate it bringing a veteran presence into the room.
he was one of those guys when he came out, there was like a section of the populace that was very excited about Myles
Mm-hmm.
Gaskin until he played football. And then it was just kind of
Yeah,
it
it's
didn't
it's
really
never
go anywhere.
materialized for him to be a star piece of an NFL room, but he's been a piece of an NFL room his entire career. And I
Right.
think, he ends up as a solid rotational guy. Naheem Hines is a little bit more explosive as like a receiver and a kick returner, but think of a guy who's playing the Naheem Hines role, right? Like, as somebody who you're never going to ask him to be your lead back, but you're not embarrassing yourself by putting him out there on the field and
He
having
fills
him
out the room.
get some
He
carries
fills
for you.
out the room.
Exactly. When you
Yeah.
have when Wongwu's hurt and Dwayne McBride just to me didn't cut it in preseason, I think the Vikings agreed with me. And he's somebody who's on the practice squad, right? So they're hoping that maybe he matches the speed of the game more with a year to develop or something like that. Obviously, he came from UAB, so it's not the high level of like SEC football that you might necessarily see from a running back.
Right.
Jalen Reagor initially made the 53, which is a victory for me because I had him on my initial 53. I had 6 receivers and 4 tight ends on a 53-man prediction I did after week 2, which is kind of what I went over on my most recent episode that we released. Um, and, you know, a lot of people came to me when I posted it on Twitter and were like, there's no way they're going to keep 6 receivers and 4 tight ends, which they ended up doing. And they only kept 8 offensive linemen. Now, they brought in an offensive lineman. They cut a receiver in Reagor for that offensive lineman, right? Pretty clearly for a 1-to-1. But I just didn't like any of the offensive linemen on the Vikings enough to make that move, to keep a 9th guy in that situation. And the key there is Chris Reed's on NFI, right? Who I think is a solid makes a team. And they traded Vidarian Lowe, right? They traded Vidarian Lowe for a 6th-round pick. So you could see it if they hadn't traded Vidarian Lowe, maybe keeping the 9 guys, which means Udo, Schlotman, and Brandel are your backups, right? Your 5 starters are the same from last year. We don't need to go over those. But I wasn't impressed with Schlotman during the preseason, honestly, and I wasn't impressed with Udo either. So I'm not thrilled about those two. Udo, it makes sense to keep on the roster because it actually costs you more to cut him regardless, because he's got some veteran salary cap benefit where he only counts like $1 million against the cap and his real contract's like $2.2 million. You cut him, you actually owe an extra $1 million against the cap, which is pretty significant at this point in the season. The Vikings cap number dropped from like 10 million to like just over 3 million, and that's because some of the cuts hit with guaranteed money, and also about 4 million of that was practice squad players that ended up hitting the cap. Another thing I should mention is the most shocking one to me, which in hindsight I don't actually think it's too surprising, is they cut Luigi Villain and kept Andre Carter. Andre Carter is very raw at this point, right? He needs a ton of seasoning, but they did guarantee him $300,000. And on top of that, you know, so they didn't want to risk losing him, I think, through the waiver process to somebody who's willing to stash him. Luigi Villain is on the practice squad now, so he's eligible for the Vikings to bring him up, or if they have an injury or something, they can, you know, just sign him to the regular season roster or do that as part of other transactions throughout the season. So I think Luigi Villain would play football before Andre Carter does. For the Minnesota Vikings this year. It's just Carter's the one on the roster because they don't want to lose him. And it kind of makes sense. You know, you only dress 46 guys for game day. So if Andre Carter's on the roster all 18 weeks for the Vikings this season, you know, I expect him to probably not dress for any individual game unless we have a game that doesn't matter at the end of the season or something like that, right? Where you want to get those young guys some space. Other things on the defensive line, you know, Asese Otomewo, a 5th-round pick last year, was cut. That wasn't a surprise to me. I kind of had him off of my roster prediction as well. I just think that he's kind of a tweener, or he is a strong base end, which there isn't that much of a use for in the Flores system. Because he really wasn't able to collapse down and take on guards in the way that you needed him to in the Flores system. He was kind of playing the same role that like we would ask a Jonathan Bullard to play, and Patrick Jones actually I thought did a pretty good job on a couple snaps that he had playing the role where he's like a 3 technique on some snaps. Asese Otomewo got washed out constantly in the run game in the second half in the preseason, which is not a good sign for a player who you're hoping to make the roster. I don't believe he's on the Vikings practice squad. I believe he went somewhere else. TJ Smith and Sheldon Day both flashed for me in the preseason. I thought they were potentially rosterable players based on how they flashed. That should be taken with a grain of salt because I just talked about how bad the Vikings offensive linemen are, and it's not like offensive linemen around the league are all that much better, especially the Cardinals offensive line, right? Like if he's dominating the Cardinals offensive line, maybe you like their 3rd-string offensive lineman, maybe you shouldn't put a ton of stock into that in the preseason, right? But they both made the practice squad, so the Vikings clearly saw something that they like, and it should be noted that it costs more for the team to keep veterans on the practice squad than it does younger players, so, you know, there is a little bit of a cost detriment to keeping those guys. Right. The other thing that kind of shocked people, who I had on the fringe on my roster and would have cut him, and I've had him cut since day one of training camp. Basically, since Mekhi Blackman took over his spot in training camp, I pretty much had Joanne Williams off the roster. He felt to me like the veteran who you bring in to teach the system, and then he gets surpassed by everybody else. That's exactly what happened. He is back on the practice squad, so there may be a situation where if we have a quarter injury, he's the one who gets elevated for those games. That makes a ton of sense to me as well.
We,
Um,
we will always look back fondly to early August 2023 when Jawan Williams was a starter for the Minnesota Vikings.
Exactly.
We all knew it
He
was
was our starting outside cornerback. That's how it remained for sure. But no, in all seriousness, he did have a couple nice plays during the preseason that I liked, and then he had a couple of really poor plays. So I think he could be somebody who exists on that roster fringe, but he is on the roster fringe. People were maybe talking about them cutting Booth. I'm just not ready to give up on the second round pick. Like Joanne Williams very well may be better if he gets into a football game than Andrew Booth is right now. But it's kind of the similar scenario with Carter and Villain. But I have a lot more faith in Andrew Booth than I do in Andre Carter. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. And then finally, some guys I just wanted to shout out. Three undrafted free agents if you count Carter, but he's kind of a grandfathered in. Ivan Pace obviously rocked the preseason. We've talked about him a ton. Najee Thompson rocked special teams in the preseason. Like, what an incredible move. Shout out to Luke Braun, who got that right from literally like the day we signed him onto the 90-man roster. He was like, actually, this guy takes special teams really seriously, and that means he's going to make the roster because nobody else in the world does. And that's very true. Like, he absolutely killed it on special teams. I also wanted to shout out Nick Muse, who I thought had a very good preseason. And that's the reason I was comfortable taking 4 tight ends, because to me, Muse was just the best player available for that kind of 53rd man spot. He may very well be the 53rd man on the roster, but I thought he was the best player of the rest of the guys that got cut. So I wanted to shout him out because I thought he played pretty well during the entirety of the preseason. And Jay Ward as well. I don't think Ward played as well, but I think he's somebody who we might be able to groom into a slot role. And, we only have 5 corners. We kept 5 safeties. I think that's because the team thinks that Ward has that safety flexibility. Oh, I'm sorry. We kept 6 safeties. We kept Theo Jackson as well. And I want to shout him out because he, again, was kind of playing that back up to Josh Metellus. I think he and Ward kind of meet that corner safety flexibility. So I didn't have Jackson on my initial 53. That was a little bit of a surprise to me, but I totally get it.
Okay, so that's, the guys who kind of made it, the bubble guys who didn't. We've got some practice squad players in there. One of the big question marks that the Minnesota Vikings have right now as a team, pretty much all of it relates to salary cap, and it relates to players that we have who are not under contract after this season or next season. Extensions. It's been a big topic around Minnesota, and there's good reason for it because we have, lots of, we feel like a team in flux. And one of the players that was in flux during camp had the sniffles, and he had a bruised thumb, and he had a sore toe.
Let's get it right. He had an ear infection that affected his balance, and then he had lower back stiffness. And you know what? Once TJ Hockenson sat down,
contractitis is what he had.
Once TJ Hockenson sat down in the very comfortable chair that the Vikings had sit him down, like the ergonomics worked just right. It put his back in exactly the right position, and everything lined up, and he's good now.
Put a little wrist brace on his hand so he could sign his contract without any pain. Congratulations to TJ Hockenson. All kidding aside, it's a player that kind of stormed on the scene for us. He's proven that he's going to be a really valuable piece of this team going forward, and they gave him the money to prove it. So kudos to him. And did you want to comment on his contract at all?
Yeah, so first of all, we're joking about it, right? Obviously, I like TJ Hockenson a lot. I thought he unlocked layers of this offense. Obviously, he was the second most targeted player after we got him last year. it was just kind of funny that it's like this hold in situation that's very obviously a hold in when they're trying to work on the contract details. And they came out and said that Danielle Hunter was holding in, right? They were like, yeah, we're holding him out of activities while we work on this contract. But with Hockenson, it was like, oh, well, he's got this and that and whatever. And he probably did have an ear infection. And everybody who plays football probably deals with some minor injuries that you can use as an excuse to keep people out. It was just funny how they played the game two different ways those times. So TJ Hockenson on paper or whatever, the form that the agent sent to Adam Schefter and everybody, the tweet that TJ Hawkinson's agent wrote for those guys said he's the highest paid tight end in the NFL. He got a market setting contract, which I don't really understand the language of a market setting contract for TJ Hawkinson. If I look at tight end contracts at over the cap right now, the average per year for Darren Waller is $17 million. TJ Hawkinson's reported average per year was 17.1. In reality, it's 16.5 because the extra money above the 66 million that he can earn is incentive based in this contract. So, without the incentives, it didn't set the market at all. But B, it barely reset the market, right? It was just over the previous deal. That's like saying Lamar Jackson's contract when he got $1 million more than Jalen Hurts was a market setting contract. No, Jalen Hurts was the market setter, and then everybody else just kind of jumps up in line after that. So I didn't really love that language from the reporting.
Agent 4D chess, man.
And to give Arif Hassan some credit here, he was the one who came up with translating the cap numbers to the year everybody's contract was signed, and that makes TJ Hawkinson's contract the sixth richest in tight end history, right? It's below Travis Kelce, it's below George Kittle because they signed their contracts 3 years ago, and the cap environment has changed drastically since then, right? If Travis Kelce were to sign a contract extension right now, it would probably be upwards of $20 million a year. Now, maybe because he's 34 and right now he has that bone bruise or whatever.
Yeah.
That's not exactly the case. But a true market setting contract for a tight end would be above $20 million, not just barely above what Darren Waller, who's also in his 30s, is getting, right? So TJ Hawkinson, I think he's 26 or 27 or something like that. By the time this contract is up or his final year, he'll be 30 in the contract, and that's 5 years from now. So he's a younger player who you hope is ascending, right? This is his 5th year in the NFL. He's played pretty well. And I would be hard pressed to say there are 5 tight ends in the NFL better than him, right? Like, I think obviously Travis Kelce is better, right? Obviously when George Kittle is healthy, he's better. Darren Waller is, when he's healthy as well, right? He's got huge injury concerns, has, better receiving chops than TJ Hawkinson does. I don't even think Darren Waller is a blocker really at all. He's mostly a receiver from that position. But once you get beyond that, TJ Hawkinson to me is kind of in the mix of players who are that good at that position. Like your Dallas Goederts or other guys in that range. I think TJ Hawkinson is right there. Or Kyle Pitts, assuming Arthur Smith figures out how to use him this season. So I really like the deal for the Vikings because
for listeners who aren't aware, that was a shot at me because Kyle Pitts is on my fantasy.
I that was kind of a shot at Arthur Smith. I really liked Kyle Pitts coming out. Like, I thought he was totally worth it for them to take it at that spot.
He's an awesome player who's already had 1,000 yards. Let's just move on, Matt. Okay, let's not get into
I think
we got 15 seconds of fantasy at the end of the show.
No, I think the Hockenson deal ultimately is very good for the Vikings. And I think the trade looks good with the Lions too. We didn't give up a ton. It was a swap of a second and a third this year, and then a second and a fourth next year, or a third and a fourth, or something like that. There might be some incentive tied to there. I forget exactly what the terms were. But at the end of the day, like, you're not giving up a ton for somebody who's on the upper echelon of the NFL. And the Lions turned around and drafted a tight end with a pick that was earlier than the one they got from the Vikings, right? So it's like, they're not really, doing themselves a ton of favors by saying, oh, we were fine at tight end. No, you weren't. You needed to go draft another Iowa tight end, coincidentally.
We're in a period of time where I feel like, and this is great because tight ends are fun and awesome. We talk about tight ends a lot, but I feel like
Hmm.
in the zeitgeist now. But the truth of the matter is, there's actually only a handful who really make huge impacts for their teams, right? Like
Yep.
most tight ends end up being solid players who you can count on in certain situations, and that's great. That's great. But the list of guys who are truly like impact players is actually pretty small. And I think without question, TJ's on there. So very good work by Kwesi and company getting that done. Now let's finish off JJ's.
By the way, in
Um,
case there are any Ravens fans that listen to this podcast for some reason, Mark Andrews also better than TJ Hockenson. He just popped into
Sure.
my brain.
Yeah, we'll give him that. All right. So let's very briefly, Matt, because honestly, we have basically been doing this for months and months already, talking about what this team is, who the Minnesota Vikings are in 2023. So we don't have to spend a ton of time on this because truth of the matter is, I think we're all sick of talking about it and reading about it and, and listening to it. The reality is it's time to start playing games. Let's put the pedal to the metal, see what it is. But just generally, offensively, who do you think the Minnesota Vikings are this year?
I mean, I think they are still a team that is going to be run through Justin Jefferson. I think if you want to go try to put percentages to it, they're going to be either they may attempt to run the ball more this year. They were very high in terms of pass to run ratio, but they very clearly signaled with the addition of Josh Oliver, with the re extension of CJ Ham this offseason, that they want to be better at running the football. Maybe not running the football more, but better at running the football. And I think that comes with a little bit of a personnel shift where they were 70+% 11 personnel last year. Maybe that dips down into the 60s range, right? And you see a lot more 12 personnel, you see more 21 personnel. But I think the benefit that you get from that is it actually opens things up downfield. You condense everything in the box a little bit more to try to force teams to stop the run. It opens things up for Justin Jefferson a little bit. If you can prove that Josh Oliver can be somewhat of a receiving threat or at least a dump off threat, TJ Hockenson we know is a maybe not an elite downfield threat, but he is a downfield receiving threat, right? Like he can catch, he's not just going to be a guy you dump it off to at 6 yards at a check down. He can do things over the middle of the field in the intermediate areas. And then you have Jordan Addison or KJ Osborne on the other side, who you're hoping can help out, right? Like Jordan Addison being in the game instead of Adam Thielen, I think helps TJ Hockenson, right? Because we talked about Hockenson, he's not on that elite type of tight end tier. And, I would classify that as somebody who's a matchup problem where the defense needs to focus on covering them to stop them. If you put a linebacker on TJ Hockenson, he's going to win. If you put a cornerback or you commit yourself to one of these great, tight end stopping safeties like a Jaron Kersey, I don't think TJ Hockenson wins that matchup, where Travis Kelce wins that matchup like every single time, right? But when you can't do that because you have to dedicate a ton of resources to stopping Justin Jefferson on one side, and then you can't forget about Jordan Addison on the other side, like you could kind of line somebody up against Adam Thielen and forget about him last year, that unlocks TJ Hockenson a little bit more as a threat. And I think that going to 12 personnel helps the Vikings do that, right? Because it puts the hope is that they're able to put heavier bodies on the field. Because when the Vikings went 12 personnel last year, opposing teams played nickel at like the highest rate in the league compared to all the other teams against 12 personnel because they weren't scared about the Vikings run game. So you need to not necessarily have a great running game, but you need to have some sort of efficiency in the running game where you make an opponent put an extra player down in the box to try to stop the run. And then that will help you be more explosive and more consistent on the offensive side. Because I think the Vikings, well, first of all, the Vikings run game was atrocious in terms of success rate. And then we had a number of Dalvin Cook explosive runs, right, that he ripped off last year. They were 29th in success rate, I believe, last year. It was just garbage. Running the football. And then the passing game ran through Justin Jefferson, and they kind of lacked the explosive plays. Actually, they didn't have a ton of plays that were like 30, 40 plus yards, but it was a lot of big, like 15, 25, those sort of chunk plays that got them down the field. So I'm hoping to get a couple more huge plays this year and more consistency in the run game. And you're going to see this vault to a top 10 offense where it was kind of middle of the pack last year.
Okay.
The other thing that bears mentioning is the offensive line hasn't turned over at all. On one hand, having continuity is a good thing. On the other hand, we had some weak links on that offensive line, particularly Ed Ingram. Obviously, he was a rookie. You hope he progresses, but it's not like Garrett Bradbury or Ezra Cleveland are world beaters, especially against the more powerful tackles in the NFL, right? So that interior line protecting Kirk was a big problem down the stretch last year. I mean, we got dominated by Dexter Lawrence of the Giants in the wild card game, especially towards the end of that game. So preventing those disasters from happening, I think, is a big key for the Vikings to continue their success from last year this season.
I largely agree with you, Matt. I don't have a ton to add, but I think mostly the approach on offense has been to run it back because we were very successful in offense last year. Offense wasn't really the problem. Um, and I think you can even make a solid case that Addison stands a chance to improve over what Adam Thielen was able to do last year. So I think right there you're looking at a lot of positives. The only bone to pick that I have with the whole offseason chatter and the thing that I'm not sure about with the Vikings offensively this year is I think there's a lot of assuming happening regarding our running game.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot of people making the assumption that losing Dalvin Cook, that jettisoning Dalvin, not only will there be a lateral movement in our running game, it's going to improve just automatically. Oh yeah,
Well,
Dalvin was the problem,
I don't
and
think
and
it.
I
I don't think it has anything to do with Dalvin. I think it has to do with the investments outside of Dalvin. Like
okay. Well,
I don't think
this is what
many
I'm saying though,
people are
Matt.
like
Is
Madison's a better back than Cook.
I think I don't know about that. I think a lot of people point the finger at Dalvin. They say he was the problem, and now we're looking at, I'm sorry, just talent wise, one of the weakest position groups on the team and one of the weakest running back rooms that I can recall, at least as far as talent goes, since like the Michael Bennett days, a long time ago. So I'm very concerned about our ability to just manufacture what this offense needs on the ground this year. I I could be wrong, like we'll see. A couple weeks in, I may be looking at this and going, you know what, maybe Dalvin was the problem, and I'll change my tune entirely. But right now, until I see it out there, I'm a little concerned about that. But I think offensively, we stand every chance to be as good or better than we were last year. And it'll be largely the same offense, I think.
Yeah. So with the run game, one final thing I want to say is you get out what you put into your offense and everything you run in general as a football team in terms of the time that you put into it. And I think the Vikings last year were focused on how do we get Justin Jefferson, who's clearly our best player on offense, the ball as often as possible. Kevin O'Connell's a new coach coming in. We saw in the quarterback series, Kirk Cousins was still learning the offense, which is natural. Like Kirk, you could say whatever you want about Kirk. I don't think you can say that dude does not work as hard as he possibly can to try to do as much as he can to win football games, right? So it's not he was slacking trying to learn the offense and just didn't understand it. It's
I
just
don't think I don't think even Kirk's biggest hater would say he's a
no,
slacker. I don't think that's
it's just there's so much to import. You can only do so much in the first year. And even though we ran similar concepts, like it's new terminology, it's all that stuff. So if we're focused on the passing game, we're not focused on the running game. And it was kind of a boring running offering that we put on the table last year, right? In terms of the calls we were making and all that sort of stuff. It seems like the Vikings outwardly have invested a lot in making the running game better personnel wise, and I have to assume that they've also invested a lot time wise and practice wise and installation wise to try to make that running game better and more cohesive. So that to me is the biggest thing that's going to boost it. And at the end of the day, I think your engine of your running game in terms of the consistency is really held by how well it's blocked. It's like the running backs that get to the NFL level to me are competent enough to get what is blocked for them, right? So when we didn't have a ton blocked for Dalvin Cook last year, he did break off a couple of great runs, but there were how many runs was he like shoestring close to getting, right? If we get those holes, maybe we're not breaking off 30, 50-yard games with Alex Madison, but we are breaking off 10-yard gains, 15-yard games where Dalvin was getting 3 or 4 yards last year.
and that'll keep us on schedule, which will open things up. Yeah,
Yeah.
I hear where you're going with that, and I won't belabor the point. I'm just a little concerned. That's all. Okay. Defense. Let's talk about the defense really quickly. Who are the Minnesota Vikings on the defensive side of the ball this
Well,
season, Matt?
they're a lot more exciting than they were last year in both directions, right? So they're going to let up a lot more big plays because they're playing a lot riskier style of defense. They're bringing in the Flores system. You're going to see 5 guys on the line of scrimmage a lot, which we kind of saw with the Donatel defense because this is a 3-4. I want to bring up a couple things because we've talked, we have a whole episode on what this defense is going to look like. When the Vikings are in their base personnel and they have 3 defensive linemen and 2 edge rushers, whether it's Marcus Davenport and or DJ Wanham or Daniil Hunter, right, as your 2 edge rushers, 3 of those guys, and they send all 5 guys, that is not a blitz. That is just your basic pass rush formation. When they are in that formation and one of those guys drops into coverage and it's Daniil Hunter, that is not something you should freak out about. When they have 5 guys on the line of scrimmage and Ivan Pace is standing up over the center and Daniil Hunter drops back into coverage, that is not something you should freak out about. Like, I see people talking about that a ton in reference to Donatel, that Daniil Hunter dropping into coverage was the problem. No, the problem was the coverage. It wasn't necessarily Daniil Hunter occasionally, like 15 snaps, dropping into coverage all of last season, right? Like, he's going to be asked to primarily rush the passer. That is primarily his job. I think we're going to see a ton more blitzing up front from the Vikings than we did last year. We're going to see a ton of stunts. We're going to see some really fun, unique formations that Brian Flores has. We're going to see the return of the double A gap looks. That's called Charger in this Flores defense. We're going to see an even more aggressive blitz where we put all the players. This is the Jay Ward sack forced fumble in the Arizona Cardinals game called Bengal. When they blitz all of them, it's called, the call is Hawk. So the formation's Bengal, the call is Hawk for the Bengal Hawk blitz, which is an all-out blitz. You guaranteed blitz one more player than the opponent can block. So you're going to get to the quarterback if the quarterback doesn't get the ball out on time, and all you need to do is tackle him. And the way they play the coverage on that play is they play off-man coverage, so they'll run it on like 3rd and 8 in this example. So if the quarterback were to go to a hot route, your corner's watching the quarterback throw that ball. He can rally and tackle the player before he gets there. So throwing hot isn't necessarily an answer for that. You kind of need to throw up a prayer or make the guy miss if you're the quarterback, right? So that's super fun. As a base, Flores runs a ton of nickel and a ton of dime. We're not going to probably see our base packages all that much unless we're heavily expecting a run. So I would, not expect it to be a 5-2-4 right on the back end. That's why we kept 11 defensive backs. You're going to see Josh Metellus as that big nickel, or a dime backer in their man covering tight ends. I think you're going to see that a lot. You're going to see a ton of man coverage on the outside from the corners and Byron Murphy and Mekhi Blackman and Caleb Evans. Blackman being a slot player, or maybe we condense Murphy to the slot. You're going to see a ton of Murphy traveling against the opponent's best receiver. You're going to see very aggressive, heavy boxes from the Vikings. A lot of single high coverage, which we played mostly too high last year. So that's going to be the general overview. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. We've got a couple explosive players on defense, at the linebacker position, and Ivan Pace and Brian Asamoah, and that's going to be great for the Flores blitzes, I think. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. Daniil Hunter should be able to feast with one-on-one matchups. We don't have a great interior presence, but we do have stout run defenders in the interior, and that's what I'm going to ask of those guys most of all. We can manufacture the interior pressure in other ways through blitz packages. So we're going to see I think we're going to see a lot of sacks. We're probably going to force more turnovers than we did last year, although we were probably okay on the turnover front last year. I seem to remember some very critical ones. But we're also going to let up a lot more big plays.
End of games turnovers were huge for us last year.
But we're not going to die by 1,000 paper cuts, which I think was the most frustrating part of last year's defense, just getting nickeled and dimed all the way down the field again and again and again.
Yeah, like watching a slowly moving nightmare or something. Yeah. It's like you're trying to walk down a hallway, running away from someone, and you're like. Anyway, I would say to that note, the only thing I would add is I would much rather watch a bad defense that's doing fun things than a bad defense that is playing a really boring style of defense as well, which is what we watched last year. I'd rather watch us making a few plays and making exciting stuff happen while maybe also giving up some play. I'd much rather watch that. So hopefully that's what we got this year. Okay, it's time, Matt. It's time for our overall record prediction. Okay, we've talked it all out. We know exactly what this team's going to be. Tell me how many wins and how many losses the 2023 Vikings have.
I haven't looked at the schedule directly. I know we have like a slightly below average schedule, but I'm gonna go 10-7. I think that's a pretty weak take. I think that's in the range where people would say, like, anything from 8 to 10 wins wouldn't surprise me. I think 11, wins wouldn't surprise me either. If we're a little bit worse than that, I would kind of be surprised. Like, I think the level of talent on this team, especially on offense, is good enough to carry this team to be competitive in the NFC North. If we lost the NFC North to one of these other teams, that wouldn't shock me. But I would pick them to be 10-7 and win the NFC North because I don't believe in the other teams in the NFC North as much as maybe some of the general public believes in, like the Lions or somebody.
Hmm. Okay. I think that's a solid prediction. I will follow that up with saying I feel a little bit like I'm stuck in a deja vu loop. Okay. I feel exactly the same about this team as I did last year. And I think I predicted 9-8 last year. And that's how I feel this year again. Obviously, I was dead wrong, at least in terms of our record last year. Maybe I'll be dead wrong again this year. It could go either way. I really don't know what to expect from this team, Matt. It's a very strange team. It's got a lot to love. It's got a lot to be a little hesitant about. It's a team that's kind of in flux, and I think that's kind of where we've been. But we have proven that we're able to win despite that. So yeah, it could go either way, but I'm saying 9-8. That's my prediction this year. I feel like the NFC North is going to be a little tougher. Won't be as easy to get wins there. So I think our wins are going to have to come from some out of division
Mm-hmm.
games too. We're going to need stuff to kind of stack our way a little bit. We're probably in the fight right up until the end, and then things go our way and we make the playoffs again. That's my
Yeah, I,
prediction.
I, I think there's a couple things to look at, right? So the division, I think we're good enough to get 3 games at least from the division. Then we get to play the NFC South, who all of the teams are bad. Um, maybe, but
I would, yeah. I'm
the
not sure I
NFC
would.
South to me is definitively the weakest division in the NFL. Um,
You said the NFC South or
NFC
the A?
South. The Bucks,
Okay.
the Saints, the Panthers, all them.
Yeah.
And then we have to play the AFC West, right? So where we get 2 absolute monstrous quarterbacks and then a team that is Patriots West in the Raiders, which has never worked out in the history of trying to make a team like the Patriots, so I have no faith in them, and the Broncos. And then we have to play Joe Burrow, Jalen Hurts, and the 49ers. So those games are rough, which brings our overall record definitely worse than 13-4, right? I don't think anybody who's sane is going to predict the Vikings to do better than they did last year, but
Okay.
I think we're going to be competitive for the division, but not guaranteed that we win it, which puts me in that 8 to 10 win range.
Yeah, I think we're basically on the same page. Maybe we
Yep.
see it differently about how we get there or whatever, but I think we're pretty much on the same page. Um, Speaking of NFC North teams, let's close the loop on the Vikings for a second. Let's touch on our division mates. Just our impressions of all of these teams that we're going to be going up against. That we are pretty convinced we match up pretty well against, I think. But
Yeah.
let's talk about the Packers first. They're a team that's kind of completely revamped what they do. Certainly on the offensive side of the ball, moving
Yeah.
Aaron Rodgers, that's a huge thing. Turning a new leaf as an organization, giving Matt LaFleur the keys completely, saying, "Okay, this is it. Prove that this thing you've been building is going to work." Without Aaron, what's your impression of the Packers, just generally?
Man, I don't know. That's the thing, is like the answer to whether or not the Packers are going to be good this year is Jordan Love good? And the
Right.
answer to that is nobody has any clue. I did not like Jordan Love coming out of Utah State.
I
We have
did.
had conversations. Greg very much did like Jordan Love, but he sat for literally 3 years, right? So we saw one game against the Eagles and a couple drives in preseason. I don't put much stock by either of those. He did look pretty good in those situations, right? So it's like, if Jordan Love is good First of all, everybody in the AFC North who is not a Packers fan is going to be so mad, like just absolutely furious because they can't keep getting away with it. But second of all, the Packers are going to be a pretty good team, I think, if Jordan Love is good. The other question is they don't have a ton of uh, depth or experience, I guess, in their pass catching group, right? They have like no experience. It's Christian Washington and Romeo Dubs were rookies last year. They're the most experienced players who have gotten the most playing time out of anybody in that system, and at tight end as well. So they've got the good running backs. I think they're going to put together a solid offensive line. They're going to have a good running game. I think it's the question of whether or not Jordan Love can carry the passing game. And then on the defensive side of the ball, they still have the like 8 first-round picks. It's probably one more since they added Lucas Van Ness in this draft. Maybe it's 9 first-round picks. I don't even know. But they've never put together a very good defense in the past 5 or 7 years or whatever you want to say, despite having all of that supposed talent where they'd never draft Aaron Rodgers as a wide receiver in the first round and they just kept drafting defensive players, right? So is the coordinator Joe Barry going to finally put it all together this year and the Packers defense is suddenly going to be an actually good defense? Maybe, but we haven't seen that in the past, so I'm not going to bet on it until we actually see it. So with all that being said, I could see the Packers being an excellent football team, winning the NFC North, and kind of just being absolutely frustrating for us to have to think about all year, right?
I'm getting pre-anxiety and anger about it.
I could also see them getting 5 or 6 wins because Jordan Love is bad, the defense is mediocre at best, and they're just not a good football team, and they're going to have to rethink the direction of their franchise.
I'll cap this off by saying this, Matt. As far as Jordan Love goes, you'll remember this caused me a great deal of pain at the time that the Packers traded up for one of my favorite players in that draft. And since that time, we have watched Jordan Love go from a totally mocked player, like literally made fun of constantly, where people were posting videos of training camp, him clearly just working on a drill, not that serious. He like missed a throw. Do you remember this? He missed a throw to a net, and that shit went viral. That's how much people were hating on this guy. Now the Packers have stuck with him for 3 years, and he had a pretty good preseason, and he's on the field starting, and you don't hear a lot of people posting fucking videos about that now. Videos of him missing nets and shit. I don't know what will happen with Jordan Love, but if the Packers actually have the third guy, I don't know how I'll process that. So we're just not we're gonna assume that he's terrible and we're gonna move on.
If Jordan Love sucked so bad that like there was no chance of him being good, the Packers would have moved on already.
I know, and that's what I'm trying to say.
So there is certainly a non-zero chance that he's good. However, we don't know that until we see that. One other thing I want to mention, and this goes for the other teams in the division, is hopefully Jordan Love is not adjusted to NFL blitzes yet. And Brian Flores is going to bring that to him. I think that's what gives the Vikings an advantage in the games that I kind of mentioned earlier in the division, where Brian Flores is going to blitz the crap out of Jared Goff, who's terrible under pressure. He's going to blitz the crap out of 2 young players in Justin Fields, who takes a ton of sacks under pressure, and Jordan Love, who we don't know under pressure, but we have, most of the time young quarterbacks are not good under pressure. So we have that going for us.
I need him to be bad, Matt. I need him to be terrible. Please let him be terrible. Oh my God. All right, let's move on. This is upsetting me too much. Let's talk about the Bears. Okay, let's talk about these plucky. Everybody thinks they're gonna suck, right? What's the deal with the Chicago Bears?
Well, so, I don't think everybody thinks the Bears are going to suck last year. Obviously last year everybody thought they were going to suck. And this year they're like, well, they're trying, so maybe they can be something. Obviously the question with them rests on Justin Fields, right?
Right.
Where it's, who knows if Justin Fields is going to be any good? Because he was absolutely electric down the stretch running the ball, right? Like, he's a brilliant playmaker when he's scrambling and with the ball in his hands and on designed runs, and he still wasn't there as a passer. Now, on the flip side of that, the Bears wide receiver group was an absolute dumpster fire last year. Just
Horrible.
absolutely horrible. And
Horrible.
they,
This is the thing, Matt. I just have to tamp down on this for a second. I
yeah.
apologize. I don't like interrupting. I just have to say that's the thing about this conversation about Fields that has driven me the most insane, like reading it or whatever this year. Like it's like people are not capable of providing context to anything anymore. Like
Mm-hmm.
that Bears receiver group, I challenge you to name a single guy outside of Velus Jones who was only known because he had a preseason punt return or something like that. That was crazy. Like you cannot. Okay, Alex
Well,
Mooney
you
has been a name
Darnell,
that's
you
been.
should have said Darnell
Alex
Mooney
Mooney
because
is not. He's not nothing. Okay, on any other team, that guy would have been cut 2 years ago. Like that is how bad this
hey
position
Greg,
group
I'm
is.
gonna keep ripping you because Chase Claypool was on that team for half a year last year, so we got that
Chase
going against him
Claypool is
too.
the kind of player they need, Matt. This is what I'm saying. Look, they have had nobody in that room. Nobody. The whole time he's been there. I think it's a mistake to assume that Justin Fields has somehow forgotten how to throw a football because he did it
Yeah.
pretty damn well at Ohio
So
State.
DJ Moore, I think, is the very clear reason that the Bears receiver group is better because they had Chase Claypool for half of last year and he was garbage on their team. Uh, but
Oh, Matt.
that is such a significant upgrade when Darnell Mooney can slot to be your number two receiver, and you can ask Chase Claypool to make a spectacular catch once every 3 games. Um, I'm sorry, I gotta stop. But when that is your option, and then you have a solid running back room, right? Like Khalil Herbert and Deontay Foreman and Roshan Johnson, the rookie, aren't going to blow anybody away. I mean, people love Roshan Johnson, but they're a solid group. And Justin Fields, obviously, as a running quarterback, drastically enhances the ability of the running backs anyway. We've seen that with the Ravens for years, right? They're putting an offensive line out there that they like. I don't think Braxton Jones, who's their left tackle, who they drafted in the 5th round last year, is any good. But that's kind of their problem. They signed Nate Davis, who's like a middling guard, and they've already had injury problems up front, so I don't really know how that's going to work out for them. Darnell Wright, I liked out of Tennessee, who they drafted with the number 10 overall pick, right? So the offensive line is still a question for me. And does that mean that Justin Fields is under pressure and he still struggles under pressure, which is something he's done mightily? Maybe he was doing that because the receiver's going to win, and when he has receivers he can trust, he can get the ball out. We don't know. On the defensive side of the ball, I have to say their defense is significantly improved from what they put out week 18 last year, which is just like one of the most pathetic rosters I've ever seen. Is who the Bears were playing in week 18 against the Vikings last year. Like the Vikings were playing their backups, right? Every single player on the Vikings who was playing was a backup, and the Bears were playing not all, like a bunch of guys were hurt and all that stuff, but like there were some starters in there, and the roster is just terrible. The thing is, they
Yeah.
added a couple linebackers, right? Tremaine Edmonds obviously was the big one. They have a bunch of guys that they're excited about in the secondary: Jaquan Brisker, Kyler Gordon, not Jawan Johnson. What's the name of that corner from Utah? I can't remember his name, but he's their starting quarter. And he's been pretty solid when he's been healthy. The problem is he's been hurt quite a bit. And then you also have Tyreek Stevenson, who they drafted in the 2nd round, right? I thought Kyler Gordon was bad last year. Eddie Jackson is a safety as well, who's always been a very solid player. He had a 1 year under Fangio, where it was excellent, right?
Right.
So you have guys that are the makings of a decent group, but will they all actually come together and become a decent group, or are they going to be somebody who struggles, who kind of struggled to stay healthy throughout the season? We have yet to see for that group. I don't have a ton of faith in that all coming together and them actually being good, right? And similarly, the defensive line is garbage. Like Travis Gibson, who was like a solid player, they cut. They've got like DeMarcus Walker is their best defensive lineman. Greg, had you heard the name DeMarcus Walker before I just brought it up?
No.
Okay, yeah, exactly. Their group is very bad. They're relying on a couple rookies in Zach Pickens and Gervon Dexter from Florida. Zach Pickens, I forget where he was from, South Carolina, maybe.
Mm.
on the interior, right, as like starters. So to me, we learned when we played the Saints on Christmas a few years ago, if you don't have a starting caliber, if you don't have defensive linemen who can play football, you are not going to win a football game. You are just going to get run all over all day, every day. And it doesn't matter if you've got linebackers that are decent back there, because guess what? You're getting double teams and they're getting latched onto, and you're not going to stop the run.
Yeah.
So to me, it hinges on the Bears hinge on if Justin Fields goes supernova, that's awesome for them. If he doesn't,
Yeah.
I think their defense is still going to struggle to make them a competitive football team. But if they decide that Justin Fields is the answer at the end of the year, they tore this roster down. So they'll dedicate more resources to that, and they may be a problem moving forward. I just don't think they're going to be a problem this year.
Chase Claypool, as a rookie in 2020, COVID season, had 62 receptions and 873 yards and 9 touchdowns, catching the ball from Ben Roethlisberger. In his second season, he had some injuries, was still catching the ball from an even worse Ben Roethlisberger, and had 59 receptions and 860 yards. Touchdowns dropped, but the Pittsburgh Steelers barely scored any touchdowns at all as a team that year, so it wasn't as big a deal. Last season, catching balls from Mitch Trubisky for 5 fucking games, and then getting traded mid-season, and then dealing with that Bears offense that was not ready for him in any way, and dealing with injuries. He still had 450 yards and a tutty. So I don't think Chase Claypool's done showing you what's up, Matt. All right? Record scratch. Record scratch. That's what that sound was supposed to be. What's up, Kindred Skulls fans? This is an extremely awkward transition, and you're probably feeling really jarred right now in your ears. You're probably going, whoa, what is happening? The whole tone of the show has just changed. Gregg cut himself, or he cut Matt off. I don't really know what's going on. Here's the deal. We lost part of our recording. All right, look, it happens. We're low budge, man. We're indie, okay? We're punk rock. Sometimes punk rock shit happens, man. You just roll with the punches. So we had some more stuff that we talked about, and none of it got recorded, unfortunately. And when we finally discovered it, Matt's very busy this week, so he wasn't able to re-record. So here's the deal. That's why you're staring at 2 of my face right now on the video. Hey, how you doing? Ooh, 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 ooh. Okay. And that's why you're listening to me, just me, your favorite host of Kindred Skulls, Gregg Blake. And I know that's true for every single person who listens to this podcast. So here's what's gonna happen. I'm gonna just go over what we talked about a little bit. You know, it's a beer cast now. I got a little can of beer. It's a beautiful Friday. I'm feeling chill. I hope you're feeling chill too. I just watched the first game of the year, as did you all. It was really fun, super fun to watch. A lot of ups and downs, and it involved one of the teams that we were about to discuss on this very pod. So continuing to talk about the NFC North, I'll just relay really briefly what Matt and I thought about the Detroit Lions. Matt is all the way out on the Lions. He doubts them up and down. He does not believe in them. And I know, because he's said to me today, that he felt even stronger about it after their win. So clock that, listeners. The Lions winning last night convinced Matt that they are even worse than he thought. Okay? So that's straight from the horse's mouth. Don't believe him if he ever denied it. He said it. And I was a little bit more friendly to the Lions, in my opinion. I had said that I kind of been enjoying the Lions from the very start of this new era. I was a little skeptical of Dan Campbell, and then along with everyone else, I saw him in Hard Knocks, and I was like, you know what, this guy, like, I may have misjudged him in terms of, who he is as a coach and who he is as a person. I kind of thought of him as this like giant meathead type of dude, but he's actually kind of thoughtful and like, funny and interesting. He's a really interesting guy. And it turns out pretty good at head coaching. So last night's win didn't do a lot to change my opinion of where that team's headed. I just really like what they've been doing the last few years, and I will not feel bad if the Lions are really good, because I think Lions fans have had quite enough. So that's kind of all we really said about the Lions. And then they played, and it kind of made me feel more strongly about my opinion, and also made Matt feel more strongly about his opinion for some reason. All right. And then we talked about 3 hot takes for 2023. That was the next thing we spoke about. We picked 1 Vikings hot take and 2 NFL hot takes. All right. And I'm going to relay this to you from memory. And I honestly not sure if I'm going to get it right, but I'm going to relay it to you anyway. Because I don't take notes while we're chatting. Matt said that, what did he say about the Vikings? Oh boy, this is going to be really, really lame to listen to. I don't remember what Matt said about the Vikings. It'll come to me later and I'll be like, oh shit, that's what he said. What he said about the NFL was that he thought that the too high shell this year in the NFL is going to take a little bit of a beating and might become a much less popular defense than it is currently. The Fangio defense. There's so many Fangio disciples in the league calling that defense, and he thought that the future, or at least the impact of this season, will be a lot of traditional ways to attack that defense, is to run the ball and kind of control clock more and take what that defense gives you more, and that it'll become a less popular defense because it's going to kind of get beat up this year. Thought it was a really interesting take. His other hot take was that he thought that the Kansas City Chiefs would win a Super Bowl. And then I got really upset at Matt, because that was our very next segment, was to pick the Super Bowl winner. So he clearly did not read the beat sheet notes that I had painstakingly put together for us, and jumped ahead. So he gave his Super Bowl pick as his third hot take, and I did not allow him to change his hot take. That was his hot take, and I made him stick with it, and we moved on to my hot takes. And for the Minnesota Vikings, my hot take was, what was my hot take? Oh boy, I don't remember our Vikings hot takes at all. What is wrong with me? I have memory issues. This is something that anybody who knows me very well learns pretty, like, maybe not like right away about me, but like maybe like 4 or 5 months into getting to know me, there'll be some like event or thing I was supposed to do that I completely forget, and it seems like I'm ignoring it and I'm kind of like a douche. And then we have to have this whole moment where I explain, dude, my brain is kind of broken and I forget things. Like, it just happens. Like, I'll remember hyper specific details about some stuff, like I can recall like childhood memories like as a baby, but I can't for some reason remember what I said was a hot take about the Minnesota Vikings 2 days ago. So that's a little bit about me, a little overshare. Don't remember what I said. I said my 2 hot NFL takes would be that, to build off of Matt's take, without him even, we hadn't spoken about it, but my take was that the running backs don't matter conversation is going to get punched right in the mouth this year, because I think running backs are coming back strong this year. I look across the league and I see so many talented young running backs. It seems like some teams have, 2 of them even at a time, like really talented players. The Jaguars come to mind. There are others. Just like a good combination of top talent, that in other eras, these guys could have easily been, your bell cow backs, your lead guys running for 1,200, 1,300 yards. We have so much talent in the league right now. I think the running back's going to come back strong, and I think they're going to get their money too. That's what I think. All right, you heard it here. Running back is not dead. It's stronger than ever. And my other hot NFL take was, what was it? I think it was, this was kind of not really a good take, but I was honestly, I hadn't prepared any, so I just kind of like spoke off the cuff. But my other hot take is kind of obvious, is that we've been talking about quarterbacks coming out of school the last 6 years, 7 years. I used to sort of half joke with Nick and Matt and some other friends of ours that we're having a QB renaissance, I called it. A stretch of time where there's just going to be all these crazy young talents coming out of college ball, and that it's something we shouldn't take for granted. And it's happened, and you're seeing that this year because all these young guys with Pat Mahomes at the head of it are really taking control of the league. A lot of that older generation, with obviously led by Tom Brady's retirement, of course, is kind of, just fading away a bit. Not in a terrible way or anything. They're not here anymore. You don't have Drew Brees out there anymore. So these young guys are taking their rightful spots as the face of the league and the guys who are going to be playing for titles every single year. It's pretty exciting to see. It's kind of like, I think, the apex moment of that happening. And it's going to be capped off with this year's QB class coming out of college, which is one of the most insanely loaded draft classes I can recall seeing, maybe ever, in terms of talent, at least. You never know, but lots of really exciting young guys coming out in next year's class. So anyway, it's the year of the quarterback. That's my hot take. Not that big a jump, I guess. Okay, and the Super Bowl picks, just really briefly. I already told you Matt picked the Chiefs to win. He thinks they're going to play the Cowboys, so another team coming out of the NFC East, which is really the only, I think we can all kind of objectively strong NFC divisions. Most of them are pretty weak. The NFC East definitely seems like it has their shit together, so to speak. And to that end, I also picked the Chiefs to win the Super Bowl. And I said that for the first time in like 20 years or something, it's going to be a Super Bowl rematch, that the Philadelphia Eagles and the Kansas City Chiefs are going to play a rematch game. And I thought the Chiefs would take that one too. All right. And then we didn't talk very much about week one. Matt has a tiny bit of, respect for the Bucs. I have no respect for the Bucs. I think they're a disaster franchise right now. I think they're gonna be trash, total trash this year, and we're gonna kick their butts. And that was pretty much it. We talked about fantasy football, but mostly it consisted of us just yelling at each other and me reminding Matt that I am the league champion. Just want to reiterate that for our listeners. I am the league champion. For our viewers, I am the league champion. Okay, that is the reality of things. And I just talked about fantasy for far more than 15 seconds. So I broke the rules. But guess what? I'm here alone and I can do whatever I want. I'm a cowboy riding across the plain, all lonesome, leading my cattle, and you're my cattle. Oh man, I've enjoyed talking to you. I've enjoyed capping off this show. Really hope that you all enjoy this week's episode before the games kick off on Sunday, and we all get super drunk or high or whatever you do to enjoy the game, whether you're the kind of person who just enjoys sitting cross-legged and letting it wash over you, and that's your high, whatever it is, I support you. It's going to be a super fun day. It's going to be a super fun season. You can find Matt Freese at Fries Football on Twitter. He's also doing a lot of writing for zone coverage that you can check out on his Twitter feed. Really, if you enjoy listening to Matt, you've got to read him. He goes even more in depth. It's lots of great stuff. You can also follow our other co-host, Nick Olson, at Nick Olson NFL. And you can follow me on Instagram if you feel like it, at You've Been Gregged, with 3 G's and a D on the end of there. You've Been Gregged. You can find the show by searching on YouTube for Kindred Skulls, or you can find us on Spotify, iTunes, all the apps. If we're not on an app that you want us to be on, please let us know. And you can find us on Twitter at Kindred Skulls. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your ears. Have a great week. Enjoy the games.
Goal, baby.
Another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. And we'll all cheer on behind, and we'll score the